Welcome back to Get Decked EDH with Alec. Today I'm going to talk about how to mulligan and the best way to mulligan to get the best hands in order to win more games. Now, if you are either a new player, beginner, intermediate, or experienced, I believe you're going to learn something from this video and you should stay tuned and watch till the end. I definitely am going to cover some things that I don't think are really talked about in others. So hopefully you'll gain some new info on this and get a little bit more perspective on how to mulligan. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. I'm going to switch to Moxfield, and we're going to go and start mulliganing. Okay, so here we are. We are in Moxfield. I am currently going to be doing the mulligan test with Miri, Weatherlight Duelist, which is going to be coming up later in a deck tech this week. So stay tuned for that. But I thought, what better way to mulligan than to showcase this deck that I'm going to be working on. So we just started it up, did a fresh restart, and this is the first hand we got. So this hand's going to be probably a no-brainer to most people. This is a keeper. But let's go through the steps and how I decide what is a keeper and what isn't. So first things first, I'm going to look at my mana cost. So obviously I have a Soul Ring, 1 drop, Exploration, 1 drop. I have Colossification, which is a 7 drop. So we're not going to be seeing that for a while, but we can see the form of mana that we're going to be able to accelerate, and then a Gift of Immortality. And then how I would order this is I would think 3 turns ahead. So I want to think 3 turns when I get my first hand because, quite frankly, a mulligan is the first game action besides drawing your first 7 that you're going to be taking in a game. So it's also one of the most important. So first I'm going to look at, I got a Soul Ring here. Obviously that's going to get played, and I have an Exploration. 2 great cards to have in your first hand. So we're going to look at this, and then we're going to order things by their CMC. So Soul Ring, Exploration, Gift of Immortality, and we have Colossification. And now we have, that leaves us with 3 lands to play with. Temple Garden, Command Tower, and a Plains. So obviously, we know what we're doing turn 1. This is a pretty no-brainer. We're going to play Command Tower. We're going to tap it for an Exploration. We're going to play, honestly, probably shock in the Temple Garden. We'll tap it for 1, and we'll cast that Soul Ring. Pretty simple. But what do we do after that? That's the problem. We can cast Miri, obviously, get a Gift of Immortality on her, and then get the gears going, but we don't have any way of drawing cards. And that is extremely important because having an explosive turn is great, and having this much mana available to us is even better. But what's important is keeping our engine going, because if we bottom our hand out on, say, turn 2, and we have nothing left to cast, we're going to be top decking for the remainder of the game, or at least until we get a draw engine, which is no good, especially in Miri, which you're essentially going to be playing cheap enchantments in order to steamroll value through card draw. So, mostly enchantresses, of course, because this is an enchantress deck. It's an Aura Voltron. So, we know this hand's good. Obviously, this is probably a good keep. You know your mana base is going to be set, and you're going to be off to the races. But let's see if this was a good keep by checking our top card. And now, this obviously, mulliganing is, you need to know what's going on in your deck, and the best way to do that is to play test, and I have a video for that, which I will link over yonder very quickly. In the video, I will put that up so you guys can backtrack on that, because knowing your deck is going to make your mulliganing that much better. You're going to actually know what you're looking for and what makes a good hand. So we can see this hand has some gas, and our next card would have been a Kutzel Monument Exemplar, which is a way to draw cards. I don't really have a way to make him bigger, Miri bigger, so we would say this is probably a decent keep. We would keep it, we would risk it, hoping that we'd get into some draw. We get a Wild Growth, Hail the Pantheon coming up. So not the worst hand, but we're not getting card draw. And that's the most important thing, is having mana base is great, but once you have that mana base, you need spells to cast. So we are going to hit restart, and we're going to look at another example. Once again, let's look at this hand. So this hand wants to be good, except we're missing lands. If you have no lands in hand, I highly recommend mulliganing. You get 1 free one, it's worth taking. You should never risk the biscuit for a god hand if you have no lands. And that is coming from someone who was hating on lands in my last video. So I would not keep this hand. This is an awful hand. We can look at the top card. Look at that. No lands. It would have taken 2 turns until we get land. So that's our hit restart. And back to what I was saying about a 3 turns ahead. You should probably keep that mentality for your first 3 or 4 turns, and then I would probably down it to thinking 2 turns ahead and how you're going to plan your turns. But obviously, for the first go at it, you want to be focusing on what you're keeping and how you can propel your game and board state forward. So we got this hand right here. This one looks a little more promising. Why? Because we have 2 card draw mechanics here. Kutsil from earlier, and we also have a Spirit Mantle, which gives protection from creatures to Miri, which is going to be huge because we want Miri getting through unevaded. So this has 2 options of card draw. We have Pearl Ear and Kutsil. Can we cast them, though, on curve? We can. We have a Temple of Plenty, which has Scry, which is great. That's going to allow us to sift the top card right here and get more advantage on our next turn, because mulliganing is gambling. You are going to be gambling every time you mulligan, and you're not going to be sure if the next card or next hand you get is going to be better or worse. So some obviously decks can control a little bit better with what goes into a mulligan, like a Grenzo deck actually enjoys mulliganing because it can bottom the cards and then use them later. But in a normal deck like this in Selesnya, we are essentially gambling. We do not know what our next hand will be, so do we play it safe? Do we risk it? We have to weigh the options. So we know we're going to hit at least 4 land drops. We are going to be sitting good on lands for at least 4 turns. That's great. What we don't have, though, is ramp, which is okay. We don't always need ramp. But we do have card draw in 2 different ways and a cost reduction, which, in my opinion, almost exceeds ramp. Because cost reduction, if you think about it, compounded, say you have 4 spells, each cost 2. You have something like Pearl Ear or say a Herald of Pantheon from earlier that makes enchantment spells cost less. If you say remove, each of those 4 spells cost 2 mana. You have an enchantment cost 1 less spell out, or permanent. All those cards just lost 1 mana. So therefore, you're gaining, essentially, if you think about it this way, 4 mana off of that. If I were to ramp 1 turn, I'm only gaining 1 mana. So I have 4 lands in play. I ramp 1 turn, I'm up 5. I have 1 cost reducer out. All my cards get reduced by 1 that are enchantments, which this deck is littered with enchantments. Therefore, I'm technically saving 4 mana. It's a weird way to look at it, but it is an advantage. So I always stand by that cost reduction is almost better than ramp. Obviously, cost reduction can be removed, so you could lose that benefit. But if you're able to have it on the board long enough, because usually cost reduction will go unanswered, you are going to be exponentially saving mana, which is huge. It is, back to my land count video, is a way that I skirt around running less land. It's how I achieve value and progressing my game board, is with cost reduction. But anyway, besides the point, let's get back to mulliganing. So this hand's not bad. I would say you'd probably keep it. I'm going to look at this hand. All right, this hand's got a lot going on. It's got a lot of good stuff going on. Like I said before, let's order it in our turn cycle. We got Birds of Paradise. That's ramp. That's great. We have a Utopia Sprawl. Also ramp. Also great. And then we have 2 cards with the same CMC. We have a Snake Umbra and a Satyr Champ Enchanter. So thinking ahead, we probably want the Satyr Enchanter out first before the Snake Umbra, so we can get a cast trigger when we cast an enchantment and draw a card when we get to that Snake Umbra. So we are probably going to order them like this in the way we would cast. And now, when would we cast Miri? So we would probably cast Miri in between the ramps portion and the draw portion, because Snake Umbra also draws us cards on contact, and when we apply that to Miri, we want to be connecting that turn so we can get benefits from that, essentially. And we have 3 lands here. We have an Exotic Orchard, a Forest, and a Rogue's Passage. This is a great hand. Rogue's Passage, in case Miri can't get through, I can let her get through. We have ramp over here in this section, evenly split, and then we also have card draw over here. This is what I would call a beautiful hand, because we're going to be off to the races once we get it going, and as long as no one interacts with us. So we can phase this out 3 turns. We know turn 1, we're playing this Forest. We know we're going to play probably the Birds of Paradise. That's easy. And then probably turn 3, we might cast that. Well, we're going to play the Exotic Orchard, and then actually, if we want to really get value out of this, we would probably on our turn 2 cast Satyr Enchanter. And the reason why we're going to do that is because we would go into our, say, turn 3, untap, this is in hand, Satyr Enchanter's on the board, we're looking pretty good. And then we'd play our Rogue's Passage, so we have access. This is turn 3, like I said, thinking 3 turns ahead. And I'd probably pay for the green for Utopia Sprawl. In doing so, I'm going to enchant this Rogue's Passage so it can actually produce color. What's going to happen? We're going to get a Satyr Enchanter trigger. It's another land, Temple of Plenty. Not that helpful, but still, a land's good to play. And now we have access to 1, 2, thanks to the Utopia Sprawl, 3, and then 4 mana. So what we can do is, obviously, for 1 green, colorless, and a white, you can cast Miri. And then, when we were to say get to turn 4, we would be able to cast Snake Umbra. And that's not even including what we would draw through just drawing on our, when we start our turn. So you kind of want to play out, when you're in playtesting, this is how it would work, but you're essentially doing this mentally. So you draw, you look at this, and you mentally map it out. And once you know your deck more, this becomes almost instantaneous. You can just read your cards, look at their CMCs, and put it all together and get the game plan going. So this would be a great hand. We would be off. We would be doing good. We'd be doing pretty well. So if I were to bottom one of these, though, like I said, going down the 6, what is not going to influence us the most? To be completely honest, I would probably bottom the Rogue's Passage, leaving just these 2 lands. Because I know I have at least 1, 2, 3, 4 ways of getting mana. And then once I get my draw engine online with these 2, I'm off to the races, and I know I'm going to draw a land eventually. I know if I'm getting at least 2 draws a turn, I'm going to be not worried. That's not even counting if I get more enchantments to cast and trigger the Satyr Enchanter. So that would be a good hand. And I would not feel bad about bottoming this Rogue's Passage, even though it is a land. Because card draw and ramp, in my opinion, are more valuable to me than this Rogue's Passage, which allows me to get through. Because I know I have plenty of cards that are going to allow me to get through, and these will allow me to get there. So I would say that's how I would do with that hand. Now, what if we had to go to 5? Let's go down to 5. Let's hit restart. Let's look at this. This hand right here is honestly really bad. And this is the problem, is in when you keep risking and mulliganing down, is where do you stop yourself? When do you let your greed subside and you just accept your fate? Honestly, if I pulled this hand, I would probably give in to greed, and I'd go to 4, which would not be ideal. Starting a game at 4 is horrendous. You are going to be very far behind unless you somehow have the best cards in your deck lined up for you. You are going to be pretty neutered. So this is sadly would have to go down to 4. Obviously, though, if we had those great hands we had prior, we wouldn't get to this point. But this is what I'm talking about, is you don't know what your mulligan's going to be. You may like your hand that you have, but it's not fast enough to what you want to do or get to a certain point. You are going to gamble by pitching it, and that is where we get into the hands like this, where you are looking at it and you're scratching your head and you're going, ah, and this isn't good. This would make me weep at a table. I almost consider changing decks just to get a fresh hand. And if we went down to, say, 4 with that hand, this is what our options would be. Now, what would we cut? Because we can't go down to 3. That's insane. That would never happen. We're honestly going to have to probably keep some lands here. Sadly, Shajari Shelter does enter tapped. I'm going to pitch that. Even though it's a spell I can cast, can't do it. Probably pitch this Forest too. And now, this is when the tough decision comes. What would I pitch next? So, Catilda is a powerhouse. But I don't have enough stuff to get Catilda really going, and I'd rather get Miri out so I can actually start protecting myself with her ability by swinging, attacking, and making sure only one creature can attack me. So I gotta think about, all right, what gets me to Miri the closest? And guaranteeing my lands are probably what's going to get me to the closest. So going down to 4, I'm probably going to have to pitch Catilda. And the reason why I'm pitching Sageri Shelter instead of, because I'm not going to play as a land, I need to be hitting my land drops, and I don't want to play 2 tapped lands in a row. Because playing a tapped land is, honestly, it's so slow unless it's in your first or second turn. That's when it's most optimal. Anything after that, you're slowing yourself down. And especially when you have things you want to cast. So we would probably pitch these to the bottom. That doesn't leave us with much to work here, but we do have a Temple of Plenty, which would allow us to hopefully get some advantage back into this game. So we would probably play that, it would come in tapped, and we'd scry one. Alright, we have a Golden Tail Trainer here. Auras and equipment spells I cast cost X less to cast. So, what this card is a cost reducer and a buffer. It's going to make Miri larger, and it's going to make my aura spells that I have in the deck cost less. Do I want to keep this on top? Now that is a big question. Obviously, actually, obviously before that, we would have drawn that. But hypothetically, so we would enter and then scry. Apologies for the misstep. So we would have Path to Exile. That card's awful. We don't want that right now. Removal's great, but we are not trying to remove anything. We're trying to build, and we're trying to get back what we've lost, which is 3 cards from our starting hand. So we would probably bottom that. And then that would be our turn. We'd go to turn 2. A Plains. We're not getting much. We're not climbing. We're not forwarding our game. We are simply just staying in the line. And that's okay. It's not the worst thing. It's only turn 2, so you don't have to be sweating bullets yet. But what do we do now? We played the Plains. We can't play anything else, so we have to pass. And now we got another Plains. And this is when the risk of going down so far or gambling your hand turns away, because you could either become mana screwed or mana flooded. And in this sense, we are becoming mana flooded. We do have things to cast, but they're nothing impactful. We'd probably play a Forest. This is turn 3, and in all honesty, we're going to play Miri. We need to get protection up. We're slacking. And that is how I would deal with a 4 hand. Now we can go to next turn, turn 4, just to see what our card draw would be. And now we're getting somewhere. We have Spirit Mantle. We can actually keep Miri protected to some sense and get Golden Tail Trainer out. And so we would probably play a Plains, and then we would tap the 2, 3 for Golden Tail, and then we'd probably tap 1 for Spirit Mantle. Yeah, actually, we'd probably do Alpha Authority because it gives Miri Hexproof, which will then allow us to keep her around for a little bit until we get the Spirit Mantle out. And also, Spirit Mantle is a red flag to other people because it means they can't block, and they hate that. So we would probably go with Alpha Authority. But that is what would happen if we went down to 4. It isn't ideal. So with that being said, let's try it one more time, starting from the beginning, and we'll go through this quick. Here is a very interesting hand. So we have a Soul Ring here. That would be our obvious turn. But we also have 1, 2, and 3 cards with 1 CMC. So we know we are able to cast. We can cast any one of these if we get 1 mana on the board, minus what color it is, obviously. And we also have 2 draw engines here. And then to top it all off, we have a cost reducer. So what do we do in this scenario? So we can switch it like this, because obviously this would be on curve. And then we'd probably fit Miri in somewhere up here. This is what we call the gamble. We have everything we need here. We have Soul Ring, Rancor, which gives it trample, and then you can keep recurring this. Say Miri gets removed, this keeps coming back. That's great value. We have Ethereal Armor, Buffer, make her huge, and then Soul Snare, remove any threat that's coming at you, because Soul Snare is so good in this deck because when Miri's tapped, only 1 creature can attack. So people know whoever they send, and Soul Snare's out. It's a tongue twister. You can sacrifice it and remove whatever creature they're sending at you. So it's like super good in this deck. So that's our defense. We have power, and we do have potential mana. And a cost reducer, which is great. Like I said earlier, cost reducers equate more than ramp. If they stay around, they have to stick around. And like I said, they usually don't get targeted. And there's a lot of cost reducers in this deck, so it compounds. And then we have Snake Umbra once again for draw, and Citizen Champion, which is a huge draw engine and blocker, because when Miri taps, only one creature can attack, and you want, at least in this deck, one blocker at all times to absorb the damage that's going to be coming your way, because it's going to be coming. And then Miri. So what would we do in this scenario? Well, in all honesty, sometimes you got to risk it to win it. This hand is only missing a land, and then we're off to the races. So do we risk it? Let's see. Let's see what happens if we keep it. It's a gamble. You don't know. I tried this the other day. I had a Soul Ring and an Arcane Signet in my Ganax deck, and I had like a Gold Span, a Galazeth. I was like, just needed to get a land out, and I was going to have enough mana to get my commander out on turn 3. And I totally risked it, and luckily top decked a land and then drew into a land next turn. Like I said, you are taking this risk on yourself, and if it fails, you will be punished. You will suffer, and you'll have a non-bow. You'll have a bad game. So these are things you got to kind of consider. Do I want to risk it to have this crazy opening hand, or do I want to play it safe and try again? Well, let's risk it, and let's see if it would pay off. First card, whiff. Right here is when your face will drop. You will sob. You will regret every decision you've made in your life, and you will probably just want to concede, but hang in there. Let's see if it was worth it. Second card, not a land. Third card, not a land. Fourth card, not a land. So the reason why I'm showing you what would happen if we kept it is because, like I said, gambling is tough. Like I said in my other video, you have like, if you have at least 33 lands in a 100 card deck, 33% of your card draw, each card you draw will be 33% chance of being a land. We failed 4 times, 5 times. This isn't good. This is bad. And this is when you have to think to yourself, was it worth the risk or was it not worth the risk? This definitely wasn't worth the risk. I generally will not keep a no land hand unless it is absolutely gonna spank if I can draw that land. Because also, if you have 7 cards that aren't lands in your hand, that percentage goes up. Just think of it like that. But no, this was not a good keep. So we would learn a lesson here. We probably wouldn't keep a no land hand, regardless of how good it looks. And this looks so good. We probably wouldn't keep that. From experience, I do recommend never keeping a no land hand. But let's bottom that. Let's shuffle our library, and let's say we mulligan this. I'm sorry I'm repeating myself. I'm just kind of drilling in because when you mulligan, there's so much you have to process and think about with your hand. So it's showing multiple scenarios in which I would choose what to do and what not to do, and what would happen with either outcome. Because you're risking. Like I said, it's gambling. So let's look at this hand. This hand looks pretty good. This looks really good. Now let's say that we mulliganed before this twice. So we have to bottom one of these. We have a Temple of Plenty again. We have an Audacity, which is a 1-drop. That's great. Resurgent Belief, which is recursion. We're not really going to be recurring for a while. Plains, Kutzil, Exploration, and Sterling Grove, which is huge protection. So we have everything we really need, minus a 3rd land to really start benefiting off this exploration. But let's say we're going to bottom Resurgent Belief, because why would we bottom this? Because it's a recursion spell. We're starting the game out. I don't need to be recurring anything, unless I'm in like a graveyard deck in which I'm discarding and trying to recur. But for this deck strategy, this is like a, oh no, type of card. I need to get my board back. So we would bottom that. And then we'd go into our turn. Let's draw for turn. Sheltered by Ghost. This is a great spell. It's for removal. This is looking really good. Like I said, 3 turns ahead. I know I'm going to play the Temple of Plenty. I know I'm going to scry 1. Sadly, can't get that exploration out early. Like I said, you want those tap lands out first and then second. Scry 1. It's a Shajari Shelter. That is a land. I'm probably going to leave it on top. I'm not trying to risk anything on this one. And then I would go into my turn 2. So we go to turn 2. What do we have here? Treasury Shelter. So we have Temple of Plenty online. Now this is where it's going to get a little sad. We didn't get an extra land, but we do have Treasury Shelter, so we're going to kind of put it in there. We'll tap for a green. We'd play the Exploration, and then we'd play Treasury Shelter for its land side, which would come in tapped. Like I said, turn 2 is about the only time I want to put in a tap land. It happens. You're going to have to do it sometimes, but ideally I like to get these out of the way. So that's in. We're on 3 mana curve for turn 2. We're ramped up 1 ahead. It's not bad. We can do anything else. We'd go to turn 3. Now we're here. Privileged position. We can't pay for that for a while. We don't have any more ways of getting mana. So what do? We're going to cast our commander. We need to get this engine going. Cast Miri. And then that would be what we would do for those 3 turns. Oh, look at that. We go to turn 4. We hit a land drop. So the Exploration filled in that land gap that we missed from turn 3. So we did not lose a curve. We stayed on curve, which is good. We want that. It's alright to stay on curve. It's bad to fall behind. And with this deck, it's easy to propel yourself forward, but you want to stay in line. So we would say that was a decent keep. We're not doing anything crazy or impactful, but we're staying in the game.
All right, that's all I have for how to mulligan today. Sorry I was a little bit all over the place. Otherwise, though, I hope you guys enjoyed the video and found some information useful. And if you enjoyed, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.